Hi everyone, welcome back to another Data Teach lesson. Today we'll be going over an introduction to Pandas as part of our data manipulation series. So first of all, what is Pandas? Pandas is a Python library for structured data manipulation, and it can be used to read data files and get summary information. Pandas also provides us tools to work with tabular data, which is data with rows and columns using data frames. Similar to NumPy, pandas also must be imported into your Python environment before you can use any of the functions from the library. So if you remember from last lesson, the syntax will look very familiar. So we would do import pandas, which is the name of our library, as PD, which is the alias that makes referencing the library more useful. Next, going into how to read data into using pandas. Pandas can read data from multiple sources, including local files, so this includes CSV, Excel, JSON, etc., and also URLs for online data sets. So the syntax for this will be very similar. The key is pd.read underscore CSV parentheses and the name of your data set in quotation marks. And using the syntax, this line of code stores your data set into the variable data. It's very similar for a URL. Technically, you could just put the entire URL in quotation marks within the parentheses, but this is also a neater way to store your data, first by storing your URL into a variable and then reading your CSV function from the variable. Next, we are going to go over how to inspect data using pandas. So these are usually the first few steps you want to take after you load your file in. So usually first we go in with .head parentheses, which allows us to view the first few rows. And usually we can specify how many rows we want to see within the data, but if we don't specify at all, the first 5 rows will be displayed. So over here is an example of the syntax, data.head. Data is the name of our data frame that we previously imported. And then here we have n is equal to 10, which will allow us to display 10 different rows. And if this parentheses was empty, it will only display 5 rows. Dot tail is a very similar function which allows us to view the last few rows instead of the first few rows. And again, this rule applies where we can specify n is equal to a certain amount of rows, which will display, but if nothing is included, it will default to last 5 rows being displayed. Next, we have the dot shape, which gives us the dimensions of the data set. So this is very useful to see how many variables you have within the data set and how many observations the data set contains. Moving on to inspecting data in pandas. So the first function that we usually use is .info, which shows us the number of non-null values and also the data types for each column. An example of an output might look like this. You can see the column, you can see the number of non-null count, and also the data type. Another function that we often use is .describe, which gives you a basic summary statistics of the data frame. And it gives you the count, mean, standard deviation, the minimum, quartiles, and maximum of the data set. And here is an example of the syntax. Finally, we have a dot columns, which can show all the columns that your data set has. And this is an example of the syntax and also the output. That is all for our pandas lesson. Thank you so much for watching and make sure to watch our next video about subsetting and indexing data in pandas.